Andrew, since we're the only ones on other than Rachel, Paul Black is conducting this meeting, correct? You're muted.
Yeah, yes, Paul's going to handle the presentation piece. Hi, Rachel.
Okay.
Hi, how are you?
Thanks. How are you doing?
Hello,
Very good.
hello,
very
Rachel.
good. Hello. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. I have my volume off.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Andrew. I'm just going to, I'm not going to, oh, hi, Brian.
Hi.
I'm going to just mute and just pay attention.
Yeah, okay. I'll do the same.
You have a tough day with that weather today, Brian? What was it?
We got by. We got by.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look, I'm going to Turks and Caicos on December 8th.
Oh, good, good.
Is there enough bandwidth for us to have video, or should we be going without video here?
Well, okay. I'm not talking, so I'm just going to go without video.
Okay, you have to put the recording on pause for a moment. Okay, so good evening and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in welcoming the properties group who will be presenting their plans to build up the property at 1987 Robertson Road, which will be known as Stillwater Station. My name is Rachel, and I'm the Director of Operations for Councillor Shirley, and I'm joined by my colleague Chantel, who's the Director of Communications and Strategic Affairs, and the councillor himself. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items that we do need to go over with you. First off, please note that this meeting is being recorded and it will be posted to our YouTube channel after the wrap up for those who aren't able to be here today. Your video and audio have been muted automatically to preserve the bandwidth and prevent connectivity displays or lagging in the video feed. For the property group, Paul Black from FOTEN will be presenting the plans for Stillwater Station. When the presentation is complete, we will open the floor for questions and answers rather. And we ask that those questions are submitted through the chat function that you can find at the bottom of your screen. Excuse me. We understand that everyone is busy, and to thank you for inviting us into your home, we will do our very best to answer your questions and wrap up by 8 p.m. With this in mind, please send any questions or comments that are not related to the Stillwater Station to our email at rickshirelli.shirelli@ottawa.ca for follow-up. And finally, we are looking forward to a respectful and collaborative discussion. Any actions that do not facilitate respectful discussion will result in immediate removal from the meeting. Paul, would you please introduce us to your team?
Yes, thank you, Rachel. Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Black. I'm an associate with FOTEN Planning and Design in Ottawa. I'm a planner by trade. It's good to be with you tonight. Joining me tonight is representatives of the properties group, Brian Lahi and Andrew Glass, as well Chris Gordon of CGH Transportation is here to answer any transportation questions that may come up. And Ashwani Kumar from RLA Architecture is here. RLA is working with FOTEN on the master plan for the site, which we'll get into in just a moment. I also see Jeff Paulowin, who's part of our project team, here with us tonight as well. you want me to pass it back to you, Rachel, or do you want me to continue?
Sorry, continue, please.
Okay, sure. So what I'd like to do tonight is just run through a quick presentation summarizing the development that we've proposed for the lands at 1987 Robertson Road. And then, like Rachel said, we'll have a time for questions and answers after I've gone through that presentation. I think the links for the materials where you can find them on the city's website has already been posted in the chat by Chantel. So you can also find the supporting documents that have been submitted for the applications on the city's website, which is the devapps website, devapps.ottawa.ca. So we are calling this the Stillwater Station Master Plan. And I'll start by just explaining why it is that we're here tonight. Stillwater Station Limited, who's represented by the Properties Group, is seeking to redevelop their largely vacant lands with a mix of residential and retail uses. Currently, the lands are primarily vacant. They're used by a tool and equipment rental outfit today. They were formerly part of the Steenbacker mill in Bell's Corners, and they've been vacant for quite some time. The official plan permits residential uses on these lands. It's the primary designation of the lands to this point has been employment or what we call urban employment area, which is intended to be a mix of employment uses. So that's where you see General Dynamics, the office buildings along Moody, that sort of thing. But the official plan does contemplate residential on the lands through a site-specific policy. And it specifies that if we are to proceed with residential for the lands, we need to do a secondary plan process. So that's the first part of why we're here tonight. And it also requires that any residential uses proposed on the lands be higher density. So basically no singles and no semi-detached, anything townhouses or greater density, so townhouses or apartments. And as I'll show in a few moments, we're proposing to do apartments on the site that we're seeking to redevelop. So the secondary plan is also required not only to address the Stillwater Station lands, with the parcel that's municipally known as 1987 Robertson, but it also is required to include the Bellwood Estates mobile home park. And that is written right into the policy. We did go to the city and attempt to suggest that we should just do the secondary plan for the parcel we intended to redevelop, but the official plan policy is quite clear that it's required to contemplate the redevelopment or contemplate both sites and then assess the implications for intensification and redevelopment. So that's what we've done. We've proposed two applications currently, an official plan amendment, which is to implement the secondary plan on the lands. And that essentially will maintain the status quo for the Bellwood Estates lands while allowing for the intensification and redevelopment on the Stillwater Station lands. And I'll show what the delineation of those two parcels is in just a moment. We've also submitted a zoning bylaw amendment application, which seeks to rezone the Stillwater Station lands to permit the residential and retail that we're proposing on those lands. So some of you may be asking what a secondary plan is. Basically in the city of Ottawa, we have official plan, which is just adopted by council, a new official plan adopted by council just yesterday, but that the city has been working on for a number of years now. But the official plan is really the overall guide for development and growth in the city. Secondary plans are more context specific and apply to a site specific area. So in this case, it would apply to these two parcels. They are a volume of the city's larger official plan, and they basically take the broad official plan policies and bring them to a more context-specific community level. And so that's what we're proposing to do. The secondary plan will ultimately have policies that relate to land use and infrastructure. So thinking, cycling facilities, pedestrian facilities, but also the pipes in the ground, water and sewer, as well as the environment. In this case, the protection of Stillwater Creek, and then urban design as well, talking about the built form and how we design the streets. So it's really intended to guide the future development. And I'll get into how all the pieces will play into each other as we move through here. So when we look at the study area on this map, you see in blue the two parcels that I mentioned. So the Stillwater Station lands on the north side, and then the Bellwood Estate lands on the south. Those are highlighted in blue. Stillwater does own the rail spur out to Moody Drive, the abandoned rail spur, but they don't own the Beachburg corridor that runs along the north edge of this drawing here. The burgundy outline is what we're calling our influence area. So that is basically bounded by Moody to the west, Robertson to the south, the east side of the General Dynamics campus to the east, and then the Beachburg rail corridor to the north. And we're not proposing any policies for those lands, but in preparing the secondary plan, we're looking at how the policies that we are proposing will impact on that area of Bell's Corners. As part of our master plan study, we've done significant area analysis. So looking at all sorts of factors for master planning, including transit, pedestrians, cycling network, amenities that you see some of here on the map, as well as road network and that sort of thing, opportunities and constraints of the site. Obviously, the rail corridor being one of the biggest constraints together with the creek. So that's all detailed in our master plan document, which is on the website. And that all provided the background for the master plan that we're ultimately proposing. Obviously, we know that Moody Station just recently completed as a BRT station, now being upgraded to LRT as part of stage 2. And so that is the closest rapid transit station shown here. It is around 2 kilometers, 2.2 kilometers. It's definitely not something everyone's going to walk by any means, but this is one of the closer development sites to that station. And obviously Moody has good bus connections today, or at least pre-COVID had good bus connections onto the highway to Moody Station and to the east. And we expect that as the LRT comes online, those buses would continue to Moody Station and then stop. So good direct connection from this site to Moody Station. We are showing too the future baseline BRT over on the east side of this drawing. So you shouldn't see the 2 stations on either side of the Queens Bay Carleton Hospital campus, but that is a future bus rapid transit line that's planned for the center of Baseline Road, connecting Bayshore Station all the way over to Saint Laurent Station, I believe, or Smythe at least. So I mentioned a couple of parcels that are implicated in the study that we're completing. So you can see here the red lands, those are the Stillwater Station lands. Those are managed by the Properties Group. We have the blue parcel, which is the Bellwood Estates community and is managed by Parkbridge Lifestyle Communities. Parkbridge is the owner of those lands and then long-term leases for the residents of that community. We have reached out to Parkbridge and spoken with them early on in our process, and they confirmed that they didn't have any intention to seek changes to the permissions on their lands. They intended to continue operating the park as it is. And so as you'll see as we move through here, like I mentioned earlier, we're not proposing any real change to the Bellwood community. We're anticipating that it will remain for the foreseeable future. You'll note here that Stillwater does own this small strip of land along the east side of the Bellwood community, which is the current and comes out beside the Indian restaurant. And that is currently the access being used by the tool and equipment rental. But our plans, as I'll show, intend to create a new public road access from Moody Drive, a new 4-way intersection at Moody and Tim. So making that signal a 4-way signal, and a new roadway that would come in through this small pocket of Greenbelt, which is the other parcel that's shown here in green, is the National Capital Commission as owners, but a new access road that would come in and then connect into the new development site. This parcel here is too narrow for a public roadway. And so as I'll show, there's no vehicular access proposed from Robertson Road. So as we completed our study area analysis and prepared plans for the project, We developed a master plan, which is what we submitted as a basis for this future secondary plan. And as part of that, we developed this vision for the Stillwater Station site to transform into a compact transit supportive community, contributing to the housing affordability and healthy local economy within Bell's Corners. We broke that vision down into these 6 guiding principles, which align generally with the city's official plan objectives, but also take them a bit further. So we have intensification, which is a big objective not only of the city, but of the province, to intensify our existing settlement areas. Creation of 15-minute communities is something we've heard a lot about as part of the official plan update, meaning that you can walk to your sort of day-to-day needs within 15 minutes of where you live. Bell's Corners is well set up for that for sure with existing amenities, and we're proposing additional retail space as well to support that. Connectivity, obviously, we want to try and do our best to improve the connections to and through Bell's Corners and through this site. So I'll show how we've integrated some of that. We want to be transit supportive. As I noted, we're not directly adjacent to a rapid transit station, but we are relatively close. Robertson Road is what the city defines as a transit priority corridor as well, meaning that they place priority on bus movements through that corridor. That's what you see with like queue jump lanes, say at Robertson and Moody, where you have bus lanes going through the intersection to allow buses to move more freely through those intersections. Complete community is intended to create a place where people can sort of build on that 15-minute community idea, but they can meet their day-to-day needs in proximity to where they live. They don't need to drive everywhere. They can walk and cycle and take the bus where they need to go. Options for aging in place and provision of additional housing options within Bell's Corners. So we are proposing, as I mentioned, apartments only as our built form, but we feel like that will improve the or add to the housing options within Bell's Corners, and also provide opportunities for people to age in place, maybe move out of a large home into an apartment, but stay in their community. And finally, built form. So we wanted to pay a special attention to how we transition to different built forms. Obviously, we know that the Bellwood lands will remain as low-rise residential. And so we want to figure out how we can propose a built form that's going to be compatible with that form, but also take into effect the policies supporting intensification and just balancing all of that. So we prepared two sort of overall drawings for the development. The first is this demonstration plan. So this shows how the study area, which is what's sort of in green here, would develop out. So you see the low rise, which in the city of Ottawa is defined as everything under 4 stories. The low rise Bellwood lands here remaining as they are today. And then you see in blue, you see the Stillwater Station lands, which is where the intensification and development is proposed. So on the Bellwood, on the Stillwater Station site, we're seeing building heights ranging from 6 to 20 stories. The majority of the buildings are 6 stories in these sort of podium type forms, with then 12-story buildings at the south edge, moving up to 16 stories, and then 2 20-story buildings at the north end of the site. We're providing lots of separation from the existing low-rise to the south on the Bellwood lands. These roadways are 22 meters or so in width, so we're talking about a 22-meter separation to the 6-story, and then around a 38-meter separation to the first 12-story building. We are also proposing this green block here, which is a public park representing about 10% of the development area. That would be a city-owned park piece, that's how it's proposed. So the city would develop it and manage it, and it would have a range of amenities. It's approximately half a hectare, so a good-sized park for not only for the new residents of Stillwater Station, but would be accessible to residents of Bellwood Estates and residents of Bell's Corners and the broader city as well. As you probably have realized, aside from Bellwood, there's no residential north of Robertson Road today. And as a result, there's no parks north of Robertson Road either. Obviously, there's the green belt just to the north, but In terms of public park space, this would be the first or the only public park along within the north half of Bell's Corners. Stillwater Creek here, you can see as well, is shown. We're providing a setback ranging from 11 to 26 meters from the top of the bank. So we measure in the official plan, we measure from the center line of the creek to the top of the bank, meaning to obviously the top of the slope adjacent to the creek. And then geotechnically, we study the banks for slope stability to determine how far buildings need to be set back to be safe along that creek corridor. So that's the white line that you're seeing here. That's been informed by our geotechnical study. And like I mentioned, it ranges from 11 meters in some places, or 0 meters up here from the top of the bank, which is the orange line, to 26 meters at its widest point over here. In terms of land use, which is the other sort of demonstration plan, here we're showing the land uses within the entire influence area. So you see, the Loblaws parcel and all the parts along Robertson Road, those are arterial Main Street lands. So in the city's official plan, arterial Main Streets have an important function. The city targets intensification along specific nodes and corridors. That includes arterial Main Streets, which are roads like Robertson, Hazeldean, Maryvale, those types of 1960s, 1970s or later main streets with generally lots of large format retail or uses, and that provide lots of opportunity to intensify over time. We're starting to see that on some main streets, Maryvale, for instance, and Hazeldean a little bit, but less so far on Robertson. But all the red lands are designated arterial Main Street and would support building heights up to 9 stories in the current official plan. The orange is mixed use, so that's general mixed use, which permits residential, but also a mix of commercial and office uses, or commercial and institutional office industrial type uses. So we're proposing some of that mixed use on, you see this north-south corridor within the Stillwater station lands. That retail is intended to spill out onto that street, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But the light yellow is residential, and that is the majority of what we're proposing on the site. It would be residential with this public park shown in green. So then our master plan, really, that's the extent of what we did for the Bellwood Estates lands. Our focus then shifted really to just what's we were proposing for the Stillwater lands. So the next series of maps show just the Stillwater station lands and how we're proposing they develop. So this is an overall concept plan. You'll recognize a lot of it from the earlier plans. The one thing I'll note here is this access road. So like I mentioned, we're proposing to make the existing signal at Tim and Moody a 4-way intersection. So that would be the only road access into this new development. We are showing a future potential connection up here to the east, which you may notice. That is actually in the city's official plan today. Originally, the intention was that Menton Place, or as shown here, previously named Stafford Road West, would connect to Stafford Road East in the East End, beside the Creative Arts Center. And so there's a theoretical collector that crosses the Stillwater station lands, crosses the General Dynamics lands, and connects to Stafford Road. But it's unlikely, we feel like, that road does get completed, but we've preserved for it still with an access road that would be public, running along the north side of our development, and would be 26 meters wide. So it would have on-street parking in places, would have trees in the boulevard, would have sidewalks and cycling facilities, as well as the vehicular lanes. And that could be extended through the General Dynamics lands if ever there was a redevelopment of that parcel to connect to Stafford Road in the east. We are also proposing a north-south public road. That would be this one. And it would be 24 meters wide, again, providing nice wide sidewalks, on-street parking, tree planting, pedestrian and cycling facilities. And that public road would also provide the public access to this public piece of parkland. We're showing that road, and we're showing its stub here. It never needs to continue south. but the city, in our pre-application consultation, it was important for the city that the secondary plan set up the potential for a grid network of streets, which is typical form that we like to see in new communities or in redeveloping communities on large blocks. It creates a walkable and well-designed community generally. So you can see that grid starting to form here with our roadway network that we're proposing. And we've preserved the ability for this to proceed to the south in the future. But as I mentioned, Parkbridge, who owns the lands to the south, has no intention of redeveloping at this point, as far as we know anyway. And that roadway would just end at that point, with vehicles being able to make a turnaround through our development and then back out to Moody Drive. So those two road connections are potential future connections to come. In terms of building heights, I already went over this a little bit, but so we have 6 stories as the majority, which is the lightest color here, then 12-story towers at D1 and C2, 16-story towers at A2, B2, C1, and E1, and then 20 stories at A1 and B1. So the intention of this is to obviously provide a transition from the low-rise community at Bellwood up to the north end of the site. So we've provided, like I mentioned, a significant separation for those taller buildings from the Bellwood lands, and we've pushed that height to the north. Generally, shadows run to the north, so by putting the tallest buildings at the north end, we minimize the impacts of shadows on the surrounding areas, on the sidewalks and that sort of thing. And this north-south road will get lots of sun given its orientation, which will create a comfortable pedestrian environment. We have a couple of views of what that will look like later on. In terms of pedestrian connectivity, we see here proposed pedestrian paths. So the yellow is sidewalks. So as I mentioned, there'd be sidewalks on all of the streets within the development. The dashed red lines are multi-use pathways. So the biggest thing I want to note is that this corridor along the east side of the Bellwood lands would be a multi-use pathway. So that is typically a 6-meter wide block with a 3-meter wide pathway that would be open for cyclists and pedestrians to make the connection to Robertson. And obviously the pedestrian paths or sidewalks and hopefully future cycling facilities that are along Robertson. We're also proposing lots of connections through the site, through these green spaces that are here, which would be private in that they wouldn't be owned by the city of Ottawa, but they would read as open spaces to any user of the site. And then we have a potential for a pathway along Stillwater Creek, which would connect the public park with the sidewalks along our proposed access road. So now we just have a couple of views of what it would look like within Bell's Corners. So in this drawing, we're looking north. This is Robertson Road here. We have Moody to our left, to the west side. The buildings that are sort of brown, those are basically the existing permissions for Robertson. So 9-story buildings are permitted, as I mentioned, along arterial main streets. Taller buildings actually would be permitted under the new official plan where you can achieve transition. So on bigger sites, like potentially on this Loblaws parcel, but generally we've shown a 9-story mix of 6- and 9-story buildings along Robertson, just as a theoretical what the future might look like along that corridor based on the official plan and based on the current zoning as well, actually. And then we're showing our proposed development in these light gray buildings. So you see the range of heights going from 12 to 16 to 20. You see this north-south road, which would have the retail, which is what's shown in orange here, retail at grade spilling out onto the sidewalks. You see the creek corridor protected and a large public park in the center of this study area, so accessible to all residents within our study area. And then this view looking south this time, so Moody Drive on a right-hand side this time, Robertson cutting across. So you see that again, those theoretical buildings, not proposed as part of what we're doing, but just theoretical permissions under the current policies. And then our proposed development here with the access road coming from Tim and Moody, and then the grid network that we're establishing with the different heights of buildings. The blue outline is the Stillwater station land. So here you would have the multi-use pathway going up along the side of General Dynamics to Robertson Road. So this is a view of looking up that that main street, north-south Main Street in the development. So you see the strong 6-story podium that frames the street. It is a 24-meter wide right-of-way, like I mentioned, with high-rise buildings stepping back and really being quite sparse along that corridor. Not a building every 20 or 23 meters, but really a buildings that have significant separation between them, letting lots of light into the street and lots of views to the sky. And then we have another view, same thing, looking up the street, a little bit of a different angle, but you see the boulevard of trees. You see these potential for these breezeways through the site that would provide additional porosity out to the creek and through the site, and also help break up the buildings. This is all very conceptual, as I'll explain in a second. We're at the first of many steps to getting anywhere near construction. So this is the first sort of conceptual look at what that street would look like. And the idea really is that these are retail uses along at grade. So restaurants or other uses that might spill out onto the sidewalk, coffee shops, that sort of thing, and have some tables and chairs, but also could be services and amenities. So, you know, dentists, doctors' offices, that sort of thing, all that type of stuff that would just help to serve the community, the new residents and the existing residents of Bell's Corners. As part of the secondary plan, we part of the requirements is to establish phasing. So we've proposed a preliminary phasing plan. Basically, we would proceed from north to south. Essentially, we would build a public road from Moody, which would be the key to any access to the site. And the first phase would include the buildings at the north end, and then moving sort of down to the south end as we finish up. This is all very, again, conceptual, and as each phase comes online, it might be smaller, so there might be more than 5 phases. There may be fewer than 5 phases, depending on the market conditions and how development were to proceed. So in terms of where we are in the process and what next steps are, you can see that we've submitted our official plan and zoning applications, as I mentioned. We do have community consultation and technical review, which is ongoing. So we have met with Bellwood Estates residents, I should say. A few weeks ago, we had a meeting for them where we gave much the same presentation. We also met with Linwood Village Community Association, a couple of members of the executive, and Westcliff Estates Community Association to provide an overview of the applications. I believe they're here tonight as well. And then, so we'll work through that. I know that the city's technical circulation officially ends today. But as you know, if you've commented on applications, really the circulation period doesn't end until the applications go to planning committee and council. It's always helpful, obviously, to get comments sooner than later. And those do get passed through Laurel, who is the city's file planner, to us, the project team. And we can then integrate some of those into, or respond and integrate them into the development as much as possible. But really that process continues. So if you don't get your comments in today, I mean, you're still obviously welcome to continue sending them to Laurel. Once we've resolved the comments, then we would prepare the actual secondary plan document, which would be part of an official plan amendment for consideration by planning committee. And then ultimately the committee would make a recommendation to council, who would then decide on the amendments. Next, following that, we'd need to really submit a few additional applications. So plan of subdivision, which would be to divide the lands into development blocks. So it might be based on those 5 phases that I showed earlier. It could be broken up even further than that, but the plan of subdivision would allow us to create those blocks, but also to dedicate lands to the city. So for public roads, for the public park, and for any other public needs, so whether it's easements and that sort of thing. That process would also have a public meeting in the community, so you would get another chance to comment on the applications at that time. And then site plan control is when we really get into the detail of what the buildings would look like. So right now we're showing really, as you saw, very schematic buildings, just intended to communicate what the street would feel like and what the secondary plan would be setting up. But as each block comes online, it would go through the city's site plan control process, which is when you really start to see the design of the landscape around the building, as well as the design of the skin of the building. Uses are firmed up at that point as to what's going to be on the ground floor, amenities in the buildings, all that sort of thing would get sorted out at site plan. So that again would have a community consultation component through the city and through the councilor's office, and ultimately would result in an approval. Once you get to site plan, you're complying with the zoning and the official plan. So you would then get an approval, and then you would submit for building permits to actually construct the building, which is the next start. So I know we've gotten some questions around timelines for construction. Realistically, we expect that it's several years before before the first building was to start. And then obviously we're talking about a significant development. I failed to mention the number of units, but there's a total of 1,900 units, 1,995 units actually proposed. Again, that's high level conceptual at this point. We are proposing around 1,780 underground parking spaces, which includes the majority of which are underground, and then the balance on street parking. And so that's a lot of units, and that's a lot of development. And so that would take a while to build out. And so secondary plans, just like the official plan, are intended to be sort of long-term documents that guide the development of an area for a period of 20 to 25 years. And so that's sort of the range that we're looking at in this case. I believe that is the end of our presentation. And so I'll pass it back, I guess, to Rachel, if there are any other comments, and then we can get into questions.
Yes, thank you so much. That was amazing. It was really quite intensive, so I really appreciate that. Yes, I've been kind of following along with all the questions, and I'm kind of marking down some that look like they may have been answered. Now, I do have a bit of a list going, but just to refer to the latest because it's fresh on everybody's minds. Could you repeat those numbers of expected units?
Yeah, I apologize that I didn't mention those earlier in the presentation, but it would be 1,925 units is what we're showing on the concept today. That would include 1,778 parking spots. The majority of those parking spots are located underground within garages, but there are obviously on-street parking spots that we were showing throughout as well. So those are the numbers. The public park is around half a hectare, 0.52 hectares specifically. I think those are all the stats.
Okay. All right, I'll mark that down. Now, okay, so as I mentioned, I do have a bit of a list, so maybe I should start back at the top and just kind of make sure we get through them all.
Sure.
Now, I do have a question directly related to the project, as outlined earlier in the housekeeping. The first one would be, is there any news about the possible redevelopment of the shopping facility housing Loblaws and a Halloween store, which is formerly Zellers, which is close by that area? So have you guys looked, is that a possibility? Is that you guys will be putting a Loblaws in there?
I don't think we're not providing space within our development to put a Loblaws. As to whether the Loblaws site itself redevelops, I'm sure that Choice, who is the owner of the Loblaws parcels, with the departure of Zellers, I'm sure that they are looking at that, but that's not part of our study at this point. So that would be a separate application that would come through the city and through the councilor's office.
Okay. So an extension to that, a follow-up question to that would be, would any of the retail space that you have proposed, would that have the capability to house an anchor store like that or similar?
I mean, it's probably too hard or too early to say no. I mean, the retail that we're showing there is likely not large enough for an anchor tenant like that, a large tenant. Those tenants tend to have very specific requirements as well. So specifically related to access, visibility, and parking. And so I think likely they would want to be on Robertson or Moody. That would be my opinion. But I mean, there's nothing to say that in the future, if that sort of tenant came in, I don't think we'd be looking to preclude that necessarily, but I think the city's policies, and I think the tenants themselves would prefer to be located on one of the larger arterial roads.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so next question on the list. One of our residents asked, is there a possibility that the pitch of the apartments would create a runoff problem into the Bellwood Estates properties?
In terms of stormwater, I think that question probably is. So short answer is no. It will be engineered obviously to capture all the stormwater on site and then channel it towards Stillwater Creek. So the way that development works in the city is that you're required to match pre-development flows. So basically whatever is flowing off the site today is the maximum amount of stormwater that's allowed to leave the site after development. Obviously, after you develop a site like this one, where it's primarily vacant, you're increasing the amount of impervious area. And so you need to then control stormwater through storage with pipes or on-roof storage, or which we're doing both of those things, obviously, but also we're doing a dry pond in our case, which is proposed as part of the development. And that is twofold. It's to provide capacity storage for a 1 in 100 year storm event, but it also provides quality control to clean the water before it's discharged into Stillwater Creek. So all of the grading that we've done, which is online, the high level grading proposed as part of the secondary plan, that will be refined as we move through subdivision and site plan in the future. But it grades all of the water away from Bellwood, captures all the water of our site away from Bellwood onto the Stillwater station lands, into the storm sewers that would be installed as part of the development, and then stores it for sufficient quantity, but also then controls the quality of it before it's discharged into the creek.
Great. Okay, the next question, and this is in her words, I think 20 stories is too high. Won't there be some kind of shifting of the land for the whole parcel? Will this affect our homes?
Yeah, so personally, I guess I don't think that 20 stories is too high. We looked at the transition and the ability to accommodate density on this site as it relates to the surrounding context. And I do recognize that 20 stories is taller than any other building in Bell's Corners. I completely understand that. But as the city grows, the intention is to intensify along corridors and in proximity to the rapid transit network, but also in proximity to the transit priority network. And the official plan really doesn't distinguish between those two. The official plan places a lot of importance on rapid transit in proximity to rapid transit stations, but it does the same for transit priority, which, as I mentioned, includes Robertson Road. And so the development has tall buildings, there's no doubt about that, but it won't impact either the soils. So the city requires lots of geotechnical studies to establish sufficient soil conditions to build a high-rise building. There's a lot of process that the developer would need to go through before they are able to build that sort of building. And there's also processes in place to protect neighboring residents. So if, for instance, there was blasting, we're not at a level of detail where we even know if there would be blasting for development here, but if there was blasting, there's a requirement to do pre-surveys prior to blasting to protect the homes or developments, the commercial development as well, but in adjacency to the blasting area. And all of that is established through the site plan process and would be required as part of any development. So I I think there's some more questions about the tall buildings, so we'll get into that a little bit more. But in terms of the soils, I don't think that that's a concern here.
Okay. Okay, so I know the next question, I believe you answered it or addressed it. I didn't receive confirmation that you did fully answer the question, or that, you know, the answer he got was quite, answering his expected question. So I'll just ask it again. Can you comment on the rezoning application with regards to building height? City of Ottawa documents seem to envision a much lower number of stories for arterial main streets. To add a little bit more context to the question, the official plan supports compatible development that respects the character of the street and adjacent areas, so that a gradual transformation to a more compact, mixed-use, pedestrian-oriented pattern of development with building heights up to 8 stories can be achieved.
Yeah, so it's a good question. Arterial main streets, the baseline height on arterial main streets is 9 stories. That's the standard. On lots of arterial main streets, or at specific nodes along arterial main streets, we see higher heights. So I get along Carling, for instance, we're seeing lots, which is an arterial main street, we're seeing lots of development at taller buildings along that corridor because of these identified nodes, which generally have to do with transit as well. This site doesn't meet that criteria for nodes. I'll be upfront about that. But it does have a fairly unique context in that we have a site that's of a significant size to provide a sufficient transition to those adjacent areas and really provide density with little impact to the surrounding community. So 20 stories is a tall building for sure. But when it's located to the north, the impacts that we're thinking about from that type of building, so overlook into adjacent areas, wind impacts, shadow impacts, that sort of thing, all of those are, in our view, not a concern here, given the location of those tallest buildings and the sufficient separation between the uses. Obviously you'll be able to see them, but that's not an impact in my view. So the impacts are what it does to the adjacent properties. Arterial main streets, so we submitted under the old official plan. So I'm talking mostly of the policies of the old official plan, but the new official plan would support much greater heights on main streets, including Robertson. 40 stories, as I mentioned, would be the new height that would be permitted on a property where you could achieve transition. And that's really the key language of the new OP, is that you can build up to 4 stories where you can achieve a transition. The city uses an angular plane as their preferred means of measuring transition. So 45-degree angle from the different property lines. So if we were to draw the 45-degree angle from the shared property line with Bellwood, our buildings would be well underneath it as we move to the north. So Robertson is likely to change in character over the coming years based on the city's emerging direction in the official plan. With big properties like General Dynamics or the choice, the Loblaws parcel at the corner, those properties have the opportunity to be much taller and provide sufficient transition to the neighboring communities.
Okay, so to me, it sounds like that the plans that you're presenting to us today, they are with the new official plan in mind, correct?
They're kind of a mix. So we're not showing a maximum heights. We're showing what we feel like is a sort of a middle ground between, but we're anticipating a 9-story corridor on Robertson, or potentially a 40-story corridor on Robertson. And in either scenario, we feel like our development provides a sufficient transition. The asker of the question is correct that the arterial main street designation generally supports 9 stories. It supports greater heights at specific locations. But the official plan also notes that secondary plans for specific areas can recognize the individual context and the importance of that context and recommend different heights. And so that's what this secondary plan is doing. It's recognizing that we can achieve density here with no undue adverse impacts to the surrounding communities or surrounding residences or lands. And we can do it in a way that's going to help achieve a lot of the city's objectives.
Okay, great. Well, that helped answer a couple other questions that have popped up, so that's fantastic. I'm coming up now to questions about the park and the creek. There's concern that any part of the creek that is in the park could be altered, and as well as access to the park. Now, will there be parking available to other residents who wish to use the park that don't necessarily live, on that side of Robertson Road?
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, so within the creek corridor, there's really limited alteration that's permitted. Basically, that's intended to remain as a natural buffer along the creek. So those lands wouldn't count towards the city's parkland. And it would also, they would be owned likely by the city as natural area, but it would be the same as any other sort of creek in, Canada or Stittsville, where you have a buffer along it. The parkland itself would be located outside of it. The city has specific requirements for parkland in terms of it has to be flat, it has to be clean, it can't have any pipes running through it, it can't it can't have any encumbrances, so like a creek or an unstable slope. All of that sort of stuff excludes it from lands that the city would take as parkland officially. In terms of whether there'll be parking or what other types of amenities might be within that park, we're too early to say. The way parkland dedication works typically is that the developer provides the park, the land, I should say. The developer pays into the parkland development charges, part of which go to parkland. Those fees are then used to develop new parks throughout the city, including this one. So the city would actually typically lead the development of the park through the Parks Department. They would have consultations. I believe they just maybe did something similar for Westcliff Park for a rejuvenation of that park, but they have consultations about what types of amenities people want to see in the park, what they can fit, because obviously if you do a parking lot, then maybe you can't fit a soccer field or a baseball diamond. So it just depends what the priorities are. In this case, obviously there would be significant on-street parking, which given its location would be no charge on a city street. So there would be on-street parking for people to access the park at a minimum, but it's very possible there would be a parking lot as well.
Okay. So the parkland that you have assigned right now within the boundaries that I'm looking at, is that planned to stay there? Is there any possibility that will be altered?
Well, so the city is still reviewing our study. So they're still reviewing whether we've drawn this setback, this limit of hazard lands line. They're still reviewing whether we've drawn that correctly. They may have comments that say, oh, you need to be more conservative about it, or usually it's not that you need to be more aggressive about it. So likely that line will either stay or get a little bit further out, but the 10% of usable area, that is a calculation that we're required to provide. So if that line shifted and it became not usable parkland, the city defines it, then the park would get bigger to still allow the 10% land area.
Okay.
So its shape may change, I guess, is a short answer, but its location generally we think is the right one.
Okay. Well, I'm also seeing a lot of questions here about I guess well, property ownership. So we're seeing questions about are they going to be condominiums or entirely, I guess freehold, I guess is the definition. Owner and they manage all their own maintenance and whatnot, and rentals versus sole ownership. And low-income housing or subsidized housing or affordable housing. Do you have any, is there a plan in place of what kind of, how we're going to meet the goals that you've set out for aging in place, et cetera, et cetera?
Right. Brian can jump in or Andrew maybe, but I'll just say, like, I think at this point, I mean, again, we're pretty high level. As each building comes online, it will depend on sort of what the market conditions are. But I think at this point, the intention is to be primarily rental with the potential for some condo and some potential even seniors apartments or seniors housing more dedicated. But Brian may wish to elaborate on that.
Paul, that's correct. We really don't know what form of ownership it's going to be. It could be predominantly rental. It could be predominantly condominium. There certainly will be age, retirement communities, just because that's a growing market. So I guess the short answer is we don't know yet, but the market conditions will tell us at the time of development. I did see questions come up about size of the units and whether we will be accommodating families, and the answer is yes. There's a broad mix of a number of bedrooms in the apartments, and so again, this is a community that will try to go after all aspects of the housing market.
Okay. So just going through here. I'm going to go back to the list as it came in of stuff at the questions that came in. I have a question here that's quite interesting. Would the abandoned rail right of way going to Moody be able to have a trail connection from the site to Moody? It's a long walk for someone to get to the Loblaws Plaza, and we should try to enable any and all shortcuts. Also support a potential direct connection to the existing trail on the other side of Moody. Who can answer that?
Yeah, I can take that. So yeah, so the access road is obviously it's going through NCC land. So there's a fairly complicated agreement in principle to permit that access road, which would see the NCC provide the land for the road. The developer would, the city would provide the NCC with some lands elsewhere in the greenbelt that they want to own. The developer would pay the difference in the value of those lands, and the developer would give the city that rail spur. So we're talking about this rail spur here. So yes, there would be the potential for that connection out to Moody, and potentially for a connection on the other side of Moody to the path where it ends now and sort of terminates onto Fitzgerald. The challenge with this is obviously how you get, if you build a path there, how you get people across Moody Drive safely. So that's the challenge with no intersection there or no pedestrian crossing. So there are potential solutions. Obviously, you could build a pedestrian crossing, or you build infrastructure at this intersection, which would allow people to make that move more safely. Obviously, that doesn't help getting necessarily to Loblaws, make it shorter. So, I mean, we anticipate that Moody Drive would see some more urbanization as part of, the coming years as this development comes online and potentially, connection up to the station. But yes, it's the rail line would, at this point, would ultimately end up in the city's hands. So it would potentially be a pathway connection.
The counselor has his hand up here. Unmute yourself, counselor. You're still on mute.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out a couple of things, but one of the major challenges that we did meet early on when this was just a concept was that we wanted to ensure the major access went to Moody and not onto Robertson. And by having it go to Moody, it goes to, it leads to direct access to the light rail station and to the Queensway. And that should look after most of the traffic without diverting it into Bell's Corners. That's the first thing. And the second thing Remember 4 years ago, we were looking at this area, and when we talked to residents, they were saying, okay, we need a couple of things. We need to do a retail gap assessment study of Bell's Corners to see what we need to do to make business survive and thrive here. And secondly, we need places to move into as we downsize out of single family homes in Bell's Corners so that they can still stay in the neighborhood. So the BIA conducted a retail gap assessment study and determined that we needed significantly more customers in Bell's Corners in order to rejuvenate the Bell's Corners commercial strip. And as you know, the commercial strip is fundamental to the survival of Bell's Corners. So when you look at this application, you actually solve both of those issues because you're creating a lot of new housing that can be used by people who want to leave their single family homes in Bell's Corners, move into here, and then new people can move into those single family homes in Bell's Corners. And that's really important because of the effort we went to try to get D&D to locate at the old Nartel building and to try to make sure that that happened because we needed that major tenant. And now we have that. And with that goes the result that hundreds of people who currently live in Orleans type of area have to move to the west in order to work at D&D. And we don't want them overshooting Bell's Corners and going into Canada when we need more people. So that was a challenge 4 years ago. And this is, I think, an exciting application that at least makes those things possible. And at the same time, we've maintained the Bellwood community. And that was also important to people. So 4 years ago, we had a 3-part mission, and this at least is one option to solve that. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so for my lots of comments here. This is great. Okay, so I'm just following through with, following up and reading through some of the chats that keep popping up, which is great. I love to see everybody engaged. It's fantastic. One thing I do see a lot of right now is concern about the lack of visitor parking. Now, as generally, I mean, should we not be considering the amount of visitors that that all these new units could very well be, accommodating or welcoming to their home?
Yes, certainly. So what we're proposing here is actually not, we're at a very high level here. So we're not actually proposing to remove any visitor parking requirements. So we would actually have to meet the city's requirements, which in suburban areas are basically that 20% of units are provided with a visitor parking spot. So in a building of 100 units, you would provide 0.2 spaces per unit as visitor parking. So it's a fairly high number actually of visitor parking spots per unit. So that would be, we're not proposing to amend that part of the zoning bylaw. So that would apply to this development as each phase comes online. So as we go to the site plan, a building is designed, it has, 200 units within the building. It would be required to show how that parking underground is going to be distributed. And it may be that the parking number goes up. I see a lot of comments about well, I see a couple of comments that it's too much parking. I see other comments that it's not enough parking. But ultimately, the building would be designed to meet the market demand for parking, essentially. So we're in the city, you know, typically in this area, you would provide 1.2 spaces per unit for the residents, plus 0.2 per unit for the visitors. So you're talking 1.4 spaces per unit within the development, which is quite high. And so I see some questions about 1,700. Is it more visitor in addition or less than? No, the 1,700 is what we're envisioning as the total parking spots, but that number could go up or could go down as we move through to actually designing the individual buildings.
Okay. And that was
So
actually
I
going to be
see.
my follow-up.
Yeah, and I see a comment about like if 1/10 of the units, but that's what I'm saying is that the bylaw requires that you provide enough for 20% of the units to have a visitor at one time. So we're talking, you know, in 1,900 units, almost 400 visitor parking spots.
Okay. Okay. So we're being asked to explain a little bit more about the impact of more use down Moody past Robertson. 417 is one route, but the residents in this project will be using another direction past residences on Moody, in addition to huge traffic volume and speeders that now use it daily and in rush hours. The second last.
Yeah, so I'll let Chris talk about the traffic distribution that we assumed.
Yeah, please.
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. So the question is a good one. And as part of this large exercise, we have done an existing conditions, taking a look, and I'm a West End kid, so realize that, right, the Moody Robertson intersection is a busy one. The rest of the intersections throughout the network tend to operate fairly well. So one of the questions was specifically asking, like, how do we judge or how do we model the distribution of traffic, in particular car traffic? And so the city does have a large scale model of the entire city that looks at different zones and where trips go to and from. And based on as I think Councillor Shelley was saying, based on the proximity to LRT and to the 417, the majority of the traffic from this area will head north on Moody, distribute east-west, as well as there will be some additional traffic that comes to the south. But there's another question in the thread that also asked about the proximity of this area to BRT and to LRT, and absolutely to tie a bunch of different things together, the pedestrian and cycling facilities that will include along the access road will facilitate people to be able to get to an enhanced bus stop type of scenario along Moody, which will then get people, again, without a car, up to LRT to be able to distribute throughout the city. So certainly that's the way that we're modeling things at this early stage. And then as we go along with the different phases of development, we'll be able to monitor and undertake additional traffic analyses to further quantify that. So I think I got a couple of the questions, through the thread in that response, but let me know if there's more.
Sure. No, that's great. And so I'm going to get off of the traffic questions for a moment. This is a great question. Why must Bellwood be included in the secondary plan? What changes could be applied to Bellwood as a result?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So there, as I mentioned, this whole area currently under the official plan is designated as employment area or urban employment area. And generally within urban employment, residential uses are not permitted. The there's a site-specific exception that references by property identification number. So specifically the Stillwater Station lands and the Bellwood Estates lands, and says that any contemplation of residential is required to first go through a secondary plan process that includes those two parcels. So that's really the reason that Bellwood is included. We, as I mentioned, we suggested not including Bellwood because Parkbridge didn't show an interest in making any changes, but the city's hands were tied essentially with the policy that it requires the two parcels to be considered. So as of right now, the policies that we're proposing basically just designate the Bellwood lands as if they were any other sort of residential subdivision, 4-story max height, which is generally what applies to the balance of Bell's Corners, residential in land use. And we're not proposing any changes to the Bellwood lands, but really we're just including them because of that policy requirement.
All right, I hope that answers that question to their satisfaction. I'm not seeing a response. Oh, that was Christina. And Christina, that was your question originally, correct?
So.
Okay, she's asking if the counselor could elaborate a little bit more. Counselor?
Elaborate on which element?
Where the city must include Bellwood in the secondary plan.
Okay, well, when you do a secondary plan, it isn't just to accommodate a particular development. It's to sort of get the community's idea of what the picture should be going forward. And when you look at these properties, 4 years ago, they were designated employment land under the old official plan. And that generally means you don't have residential in them. So I did go to council and did get that changed to permit more residential in these lands. But I don't think you want just that to be the guiding principle, or the new official plan to be guiding principle for this area, because you want the community involved in tackling other issues like maximum height and stuff like that as we develop the whole area. And you can't, if you're going to do a secondary plan, I don't think you can really do it just for the properties that this application are on. You want to define how things can work on the surrounding properties as well. And Bellwood is a surrounding property, and so is Loblaws. So you can't really do a secondary plan of this area and leave Bellwood out. I think people would be upset about that for sure.
Does that help, Christina? Bellwood is a business by definition, private property, no?
No, well, all housing is in some form or other is a business, but Bellwood's a true community, and you want to know what is going to be allowed there, just like you want to know what's going to be allowed in the properties to the north of it.
Mhm. Great, thank you. Okay, so I know.
And also realize under the new official plan and under the old one, but more so under the new one, we're all required to endure some of the intensification. And so it should be clear that the Stillwater station would constitute a chunk of the intensification required of Bellwood and of Linwood. So there isn't going to be pressure to put intensification inside those communities.
Isn't that way too much intensification?
Well, it's on the periphery of the community. And so I don't think it's too much. I think if it goes to council, if it just went to council like this, with the targets under the new official plan for intensification, the targets like council under the new official plan is going to have to find 198,000 new housing units within the current urban area of Ottawa. So I've seen this type of thing happen before. And if this application goes before council and they say, oh, I got a chance at however many units there to knock off my 198,000 target, then there's going to be a lot of sympathy for that and less attention paid to whatever residents are going to say about the development. So here we've got a chance to comment on the development and through a secondary plan on how it impacts and how the whole area proceeds. And so that there are more things on the table than just that target.
Mhm.
So there's a few other questions coming up regarding the access to the site. So one of them is, what are the reasons for ruling out the widening of the existing road off Robertson to become the main access road? And also, let me just get back to that other one. Why say it's 1987 Robertson when there's no car access? Won't that confuse everybody's GPS? I know the councillor touched on that a little bit earlier. There's also some questions regarding cut through traffic through the Bellwood community and how, what measures are going to be taken to mitigate that.
Yeah, so thanks, Chantel. So first on the road access, the reason really that it's not being widened is that it's, Stillwater Station doesn't own sufficient land. So they would either have to take it from the west, which is the Bellwood Estates lands, or take it from the east, which is the General Dynamics lands. So neither scenario is desirable. The access to Moody, I think in our minds, it achieves, it's a signalized access, a four-way access onto an arterial road, which is ideal. It does reduce the impact of traffic onto Robertson Road. And it is the path that we've chosen to pursue at this point. And like I say, we have an agreement in principle with the NCC on that exchange, but there's still a lot of work to be done to secure that access. But that is what we believe is the ideal access for the site. And access has been a challenge for this site for a long time. In terms of course, now I'm forgetting what the other questions you mentioned were. I apologize.
One was about the address being on Robertson
right.
when there's no car access directly from Robertson. And also, I think there's been just a bit of a cut through traffic through Bellwood. And I think there's also pedestrian, access to the Loblaws from the site.
Right. Yes. Thank you. So in terms of the address, I mean, that's just the address of the site today. So it's currently the property is addressed by the city as 1987 Robertson Road. So that's why we're referring to it as that address. But Obviously, as it develops, I mean, there are going to be new public streets, new private streets. All of these buildings are going to get new addresses, so that would be resolved through that. In terms of cut through traffic, so we are proposing, I just go to the pathway slide. So we're not actually proposing any connection between Bellwood and the new community, aside from this multi-use pathway, which at the south end, closer to Robertson, there is currently an access from the Bellwood community onto that path. So that would continue as an access route. We did have this conversation with the residents of Bellwood, and we talked about putting up a fence along the shared property line to prevent people cutting through. And around the park, the city would require a fence abutting private properties around the park. So don't think cut through that direction is going to be an issue. Along the creek corridor, I mean, it's not overly passable. I mean, people can do it I guess if they try hard enough, they could walk through it. But we're going to try and just provide the best connections that we can through this multi-use pathway to get to Robertson, which then would get you to Loblaws or to the east as well, to other retail along the street.
Okay. Chantal, do you have any more questions?
We have a resident that is asking to elaborate further, and I think this was addressed earlier, that you know, there wasn't an exact determination on the constitution of what the units would be in terms of rental versus condominiums, and the exact number of affordable housing units. But do you have any percentages of how you know, how much you might have of affordable housing?
Yeah, so again, Brian or Andrew, you may wish to jump in here, but I mean, the city has established targets in their official plan for affordable units. And it's something that we're seeing on lots of different projects. So I expect that there will be a discussion around that. As to a firm number, I don't have that answer now, but Brian may wish to.
I don't, Paul. I do fully expect to deal with the issue of affordable housing with the city as we go through site plan applications. But as far as percentage of condominium versus rental, we don't know. And rental housing is being built today, but for 20 years it wasn't built at all because it wasn't economical. It is right now. We don't know if it will be in another 3 or 4 years. Depends on interest rates and cost of construction. The low interest rates have spurred a lot of rental housing in across the country, but we don't know if that'll continue. So it's hard to predict the ratio of rental and condominium ownership.
Just
And
to
an
follow
answer,
up on, sorry, Ray?
an answer we've always also given to that is that regardless of what you say you want to build it to be, nobody can hold you to that anyway once you build it. There's a process to register a condominium or to continue on as a rental, and we lose any leverage over that anyway. So it's really about your intention and not about any kind of commitment.
Yeah, too. Well, and to follow up with that as well, is that if there was since you've considered the idea of already that it could very well be a rental market as well as, or possibly condominium, who would be the service provider? Who would be the landlord?
Who would be the landlord of? Well, I would say it would not be the properties group. We would undoubtedly partner or sell blocks of land to people that are in that business, either the condominium business or in the rental housing business. and we have no idea who those people are. I can tell you that we've had several developers approach us, telling us they're interested, that please keep them in mind if and when we complete this process.
Okay, okay. So we're getting short on time. There's one question I really want to quickly address before we have to go. We're talking about, the access to Moody, higher traffic flow to Moody. And it going along with that, this question asked about Moody having sidewalks so that people can walk to the LRT station. Now, I do know that our office has had meetings regarding LRT connectivity alongside with Councillor Kavanaugh in her office. No, there is no sidewalk right now, but I believe that they will be, as well as MUPs or multi-use pathways, built alongside the LRT as it's being built. So so if you could actually send that question to us through email, we can get you some more information.
To add to that, Rachel, the city is going to be undertaking, following on with the official plan, but the transportation master plan update,
Okay.
and including that as a request is, I think, an important consideration for city staff to take back as they develop that TMP.
Okay, great.
And I think there was also a question on how can we ensure that the city will want to build a park there. I guess, the city has currently been working on a parks and recreation master plan for the city. So that's been a priority as well for the city. There's been extensive consultation, and that's been something that, especially with the pandemic, that residents have told us. We've consulted with many of our community associations as well, and provided them with those links to those engagement processes, and they've been shared on our social media. And I think there's a huge push to see more parkland and green space in the city, and that's something that the city is looking at as well, into different opportunities to develop parkland. So I think that's definitely something that is going to be front of mind. So we'll definitely look at that more closely as as that moves on. If your question hasn't been answered tonight, I know, like Rachel said, we've been, we've kind of reached our time limit. Please don't hesitate to comment on the application through our planner, Laurel McCright. She can put her email in the chat. Send your comments, and you can also opt to keep updated on the file throughout the process as well. And she's just put her email in there. And if you have any additional questions, the video has been, or this session's been recorded. It will be posted on our YouTube channel for you to rewatch as well. So if you have any outstanding questions, don't hesitate to send them in to us, or as well, to our planner.
Yes, for sure.
And I will add the link to our YouTube channel in there as well.
Great. Thank you, Chantal. Grant, no, you're not restricted from being involved in the future. As I believe Paul had mentioned earlier, that even though today was, the final day for comments at this particular juncture, the comment period truly doesn't end until it goes to planning committee and is approved. So please, submit your comments. And this is only preliminary, like this is one first step of many that go into planning a development, especially one of this size. Counselor, you're muted. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I wanted to, first of all, thank everybody for coming out tonight. And I want to thank Rachel and Chantal from my office for chairing this and making it run well. Again, if you look back to where we were over 4 years ago, we had over 20 storefronts boarded up on the main street of Bell's Corners. And actually that was more like 5 or 6 years ago. And we had a severe problem in terms of the future of the area. And we did a lot of work to get a BIA established so businesses could have a voice at the city and in the community. And that BIA did great work with us and put in a lot of money and did some of the studies that determined what we have to do to make Bell's Corners even better. It's better now than it was 4 years ago, but even better than it is today. And that requires more people and it requires more housing options so people can stay in the community, but still downsize. And I think this becomes one of the options. The other thing is we're creating the possibility of a secondary plan here. And I saw somebody ask for the ability to see a copy of the secondary plan. Well, we don't have one yet because we haven't created one yet, but we'll rely a lot on the community to do that with us. And the creation of secondary plans is a more complicated process in the city than most people realize. There is a priority list and we have to get support from council to make it happen. We're doing one other one in our ward at this time. So when you're called upon and asked to participate in the secondary plan, I urge you to do that because there are going to be things you want to see that maybe other people haven't even thought of. And it is one of the more interactive processes we have. I remember doing the Centerpoint secondary plan a number of years ago. We had over 600 people out at the secondary plan sessions, and we developed a plan that reflected exactly what the community wanted. And to this day, it still is a major guide for Centerpoint. Now, in Bell's Corners, everyone realizes that it's got to change if it's going to survive. And we can all be part of what it's going to be. And again, I live in Bell's Corners near the Moody Robertson intersection on Tanglewood Drive. And so I wanted to return to what it used to be when I grew up in Qualicum Graham Park and used to visit Bell's Corners every day to go to different things like Gau's or bike to the Max Milk at the time. But it's important for everyone to participate and tell us what you think is important. And, even talking about access to the library, things like that, you want to make sure everyone knows about it coming from this secondary plan. So thank you again for everybody for coming. And it was fun delivering the notices with only my wife helping. And but we met a lot of interesting people and got well over half of Bell's Corners delivered to. So that was great. And that's way beyond what's required by the Planning Act. It's only 150 meters that has to be delivered to, and we got way beyond that. So I want to thank everyone for their questions and their participation. Thank the project team, the applicant. You know, when we set out to make this type of application possible, not this exact application, but some type of residential application in that area possible. And we made the changes to the land designation back over 4 years ago. And now it's here. So we have an opportunity to make suggestions, make changes, or reject it, but to make all a conscious decision. Chantal.
Our pleasure. And you cut off right at the end there. So I guess that's a hint. All right, well, let's, okay, I just want to comment to a chat here, Dorothy. We have your email on file. So do you mind if we reach out to you via email to help you get your questions answered? Are you okay with that? Oh yeah, like they said, everything's like very high level right now. So all those details are going to be looked at, you know, as the plans progress. Okay, so anyway, we'll definitely reach out to you and see if we can get some more of your questions answered and get you that link. All right, and everybody, thank you so much for coming out, and thank you for inviting us into your living rooms. Have a great evening, everybody. Good night.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Rachel, for all the work that I know you've put in to get this meeting organized. We appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.